before we start, I just want to see with a raise of hands, how many of you write tests? Whoa, that's a lot of people, and that's good. And how many use Jasmine? Okay, Mocha? Jest? We have a winner. But actually, Jest is a bit more complex. So now I'll try to write something that looks a bit like Mocha, which is around 5 years old. But the principles stay the same. So hopefully it will help to understand. And also for you who don't write tests, maybe you'll understand it's not so frightening after all. So let's get started. Okay, so I'll create a directory. Whoa, yeah. So I'll create an empty directory. It's empty. And I'll copy the example directory that I pre-made. And let's look what we have. So I'll open VS Code. And we have a utils.js file and a utils.spec.js. So actually our code is pretty simple. We have a utils module which has a sum function which takes arguments, run reduce on it, and actually returning the sum. And here are simple testing code. So we use the assert module, which is a built-in Node.js module, and the sum function that I showed you before. And here are two simple tests. It should return the sum of two numbers. And there's a function, and this is like a simple module. I guess you all, if you're using Jest, you're using like expect, or if you use Mocha, you might use chai. But just to stay vanilla, I used assert, which is a native module. And if the sum of 1 and 2 is not equal 3, it will throw an error. And there's another test for 4 numbers. So let's use Mocha, which I have installed globally on the example directory. And as you see, 2 tests are passing. I can now go and change one of the results here just to make one of them fail. And we have an assertion error, 3 is not equal 4, and not as expected. And that's good. So what we'll try to do now is actually replace the Mocha implementation by creating something our own. And you've seen, this is like a binary command that I'm running here, but every binary command usually has a Node API underneath. So I'll start implementing the Node API with this index.js file. Is this big enough? Can you see it? Yeah? Great. Okay, so let's start with the runner. So I don't have this runner yet. I didn't implement it, but I'm starting with the outer API. And let's say this runner is a class. So I'll need to create an instance of this runner. And I'll need to add the test file. So let's have an add file method. And I'm just copying here the test file. Copy the path. And let's put it here. And now I just need to run it. So this is the basic code, but it won't work because I didn't implement the runner yet. So let's go and implement it. We already know it's a class, so. And we know it has an add file method, which gets a file. And let's say we have a files array, so we can actually push these files to the file array. So we have an empty array, and we can add files, and we need also the run method. And let's just console log the files array to see that we are on the right path. Okay, so it's a simple class, add file function, run function. And let's see if it works. So I'm using Node to run my index.js file. As as you see, we have an array, which is an array of files, with our spec file. So next thing, we want to evaluate these files to actually understand the test. I use require for this. So I can iterate over my files array, and for each file, I can call require. And the same code will look like this. It's actually the same. Okay, it means calling each file with require. And now when I'm running my code, I have reference error. It is not defined. And you might know this error. It's an error you see when you have a variable you haven't defined yet. But you know that when you run jest or mocha, you already have this it or describe, and it's supplied by the test runner itself. And we are the test runner, so we need to define it. One way to do that is actually go to the global scope. And the global scope is something you have in every JavaScript environment. For example, if you know in the browser, it's called window. And if there's a variable without a reference, it tries to go to the global scope or global object and see if it's there. So let me just, and I can access it like this, global. And I'm saying that if someone calls it on the global, it's actually a function that gets a title and a callback. And let's say we have a tests array. And now we just push the test to the test array. So title and callback. So now after requiring the files, I can console log to see if I actually have my tests. Let's see if it works. And yes, we have an array with two tests here, with title and callback. And actually the first step is actually to evaluate the code and subscribe our tests. But now we need to run them. And I want to do it properly, so I'll create a type for it. And let's say it's a class. So this class will get title and a callback. And let's say we need to run it. So run. And let's console log just the title. So I have a simple test class that can just log the title, and that's a good start. I'll go to the runner. I'll bring the test class. That's not English. And instead of pushing this object, I'll push a new test. Yes. And now, because my tests are objects, I don't need to console log them. I can iterate over them. And for each test, I can call test.run. So just to recap, I created a test object, which can log its title. And let's see if it works. And yes, it works. And it's just logging the titles over there. So now we need to actually implement what a test, how it actually runs. So for example, if I'm removing these statements over there, and I'll run mocha over them, you'll see the test is passing. And we can actually verify it easily. So you see, both tests are passed. I didn't write any code. It's commented out. And the reason for that is because the contract you have in test runners, it means that if a test throws an error, for example, let's just throw new error here, some error, the test should fail. And yeah, there's some error. So all these assertion libraries are actually just checking a condition and throws an error. And what we have in JavaScript to actually handle one of these things is the try-catch statement. So I'll go to the test, and instead of logging the title, I can run the callback, but not just run it. Let's run it inside a try catch. So if the code gets here, it means it's passed. And here it means it fails. So I log. And by the way, I used Control, Command, and Space. Artyom here showed me. It's really awesome. I didn't know it exists, and it's really nice. You can access emojis and symbols and everything. And now I need it again. Yeah. And for here, I need the X sign because it fails. And I'll log the title. And also, people want to know why the test is failing, so I can log the error. So that's it. Let's run the test. We know that one of them is going to fail. Let's just verify. So I'm just putting a mistake here. Now, let's run our code. So as you see, the first one is failing. Should return the sum of two numbers. And there's a big object here with an assertion error, all the stack trace, actual, expected, operator. And most test runners actually use this object to parse a really nice message out of it. And we won't do that. We can just return the message, so it'd be nicer. So I'll use toString. And we have one failing test with an assertion error, and the second one is passing. Let's fix the tests. And we have two passing tests. So this is the first part. And I've showed you really, really simplified version, but don't worry, that's not all of it. Let's get to a bit more complex things. So I'll open, one second, VS Code on this Mocha test here. Okay, so I have two test files. The first one called test-spec.js, and the second one called runner-spec.js. And what I want you to do is try and understand what would be the order for Mocha to run them. An answer could be A, B, C, and D. And I want you to try and think and maybe guess what would be the order. And we have to understand it because we need to later on implement it. Any ideas? You can. So it's a suite with an A here. It's a test with a B here. Another test with a C, and a suite with a D. You can try to guess. You don't have to be right at this. Okay, so I'll just run Mocha and I'll show you. But we have to understand because we need to implement it. So I'm running Mocha over the Mocha test. So we have C, B, D, and A. C, B, D, and A. And I'll try to explain what's going on here. So first thing, let's make it a bit simpler because there are two files here. And one thing you should know, Mocha treats all the files as a big root suite or a big suite that under all files. So let's write it. So we have a root suite that surrounds everything. And when it requires the files, it's doing it alphabetically. And R's come before T. So I can actually put this all code and put it here, and the result should stay the same. Just save this. Yes. As you can see, it stays the same. Doesn't matter to Mocha if it's multiple files or one, it's still the same. So now we have two tests and two describes. And we see that the order is different. So let's talk about the order which Mocha run a suite. So every suite has a tests array and a suites array. And let's start counting them, because now we are in the root suite over here. So the first one is C. I'm adding it to here. And the second one is D, which is a suite. And then another suite, which is A, and another test, which is B. And every time Mocha, or I think most test runners, goes to run a test suite, this one, it will run test first and suite second. So it's C, B, D, and A. Exactly what we had. And let me put a bit more complication here. So let's say I have another suite which is inner the A1. So I'll call this test A1. And let's have another one which is E. And another test which is F. So now the order is going to be like this. I'm running the tests, and I'm running the suites. And when I'm getting to A, let's write suite A. That's not what I meant. It actually goes, and it adds the A1 suite, A1 test. So it runs it first. Secondly, it goes and runs E, and only then it runs F. So it's indefinitely running in the inner model that we have here, and by running the test first and suite second. Any question regarding the building of the model? And okay, great. So let's go back to our example, and let's extend it a bit. So here I would write it like this. I would write a describe of sum, which is the function that or the model that we check, adding these two tests. And I need another function. So let's take product. And the product of 1 and 2 is 2. Product of 1, 2, 3, 4 is 24. And we only need to import it and implement it. So back to our production code. So a product gets all the arguments, reduce over it, multiply instead of plus, and starting by 1 to not stay in 0 in the end. Let's run Mocha and see if we got it right. So I'm running Mocha on the example. And as you see, all tests are passed. I can go and modify one of the tests just to see that it breaks. And yes. So I'm going back to our code, and now we don't have only test entity, we have another entity called suite. So just to make it a bit easier, I'll duplicate it. I'll duplicate the test. I'll call it suite here, because it has the same constructor, almost the same, with a slight difference. We know that every suite has a test array and a suites array. So let's insert it. So this is an empty array, and also this. And we need a way to add tests and a way to add suites, because we said that it holds a state with the suites and the test. So I'll have a function called add test, which gets a title and a callback. And then I'll need the test for this. And the same one for the suites. Okay, so This is a simple class that holds suites tests and can add suites. Let's go back to the runner. And the runner now doesn't hold the test himself, but instead it will hold a root suite. And let's create it. So we need to first import it. And this is just an empty suite. It doesn't have anything in it, but that's fine. And as you can see now, instead of adding the it to the this.test, we don't have it anymore. Instead, we have a root suite. So let's use it, root suite. And instead of pushing a new test, we can just use the add test function that we created earlier. But it's still not going to work, right? Because let's run node, and we see that there's another reference error for the describe. So let's create another one for the describe. Again, I'm modifying the global scope, so my test runner will have the capability to understand what the describe block is. It's also getting a title and a callback, but instead of adding test, it's adding a suite. And now we don't have test to run, but we have the root suite, so I can log it and see if we got it right. So let's run our code. And as you see, we have a suite over there with a suites array and a tests array. The test array is empty, and the suites array has two suites, sum and product, which doesn't have children. It should have, if you remember. I'll go back to the code. So there's a top-level sum suite and top-level product suite, but I don't see the children in the model. And the reason I don't see them, it's because I didn't run these callbacks over there. You see the callbacks of the suites? I should run them, and I should add these two tests to the sum function, and these two tests to the product suite. So the model is really important for the order of the tests. And later on, if you run tests, so you know you like to add like a before hook, and you want this before hook, everything here to run only before these two tests and not before these two tests. So we have to build the model in the right way. And it means that when we require the file, the context was the runner, for example, or the root suite. But now when we run this callback, we actually want the context to be the sum suite. So these two tests will be registered under the sum suite. But for that, I'll need a helper function, because I want to rewire the globals to different suite every time. So I'm going to implement a function called rewire globals, which get the context. And the first context is the root suite here. Yeah. And we said that it gets a context. And now we want to rewire the globals. So the first one is it. And when someone calls it, it actually means calling the context, which is a suite, add test function. And I have to bind it to the context itself. Why? Because if you look at the context, you see that it uses these suites over there, and it needs to be in the right context. And I'll do the same for describe. I'll remove this code over there, and we can run it again. And it passed. But now we have a generic function that helps us to rewire the globals to a different context every time. The second thing we need to do is to go over the model. Doesn't matter in any way, but actually populate all the unpopulated children there. You see the sum and the product, the first level suites are unpopulated. I don't have the tests array populated here. And so for that, I'll create another function after acquiring the files, and I'll call it populate. Oh, that's not English, populate suites. And I'll give it the already populated children of the main suites. So we already have sum and product in this example, so we just need to go over and populate them. So there are many ways implementing this function. Could be breadth first or depth first. I'll just use Q for this. So it's get suites, and let's start with suites Q. I'll use the slice method, which is a nice way to clone an array. I don't want to modify the original one. I just want to clone and be able to run over it. And I'll use the for of loop. And the for of is very similar to the for in that you might be familiar with, but instead of running on the keys, which is 0, 1, 2, 3, it's running on the values themselves, so it's just easier to write. So first thing we do when we come to a new suite, for example, the sum suite, is actually changing the globals. So when we'll run this function here, it will rewire it to the sum suite. So I'll call the rewire globals function over this suite. I'll just move it up so it's a bit simpler. The second thing would be to call the callback, which we have on each suite. And the third thing is actually do the same thing on the children of these suites, so it will run indefinitely. So I'll go to the suites of the suite that we're running over and use for each. So for each child suite, we want to add it to the suites queue. So what happens here is actually it will never stop unless we finished all the suites. We could implement it recursively, it doesn't matter, it's just building the model. So now, let's see if we got it right. And as you can see, it seems to be populated, but we don't see everything, so I'll use JSON stringify. And yes. So as you can see, we got the root suite here with an array of suites, sum and product. And sum has 2 tests, and product has 2 tests. The reason we don't see the callback is just because they are not serializable. So when I did JSON stringify, it didn't work, but we still got it right. So next thing would be to run it. So I use the run function, which I'll need to implement right now. And the run function, as we said, each suite run the tests first and the suite second. So I can go to my tests, and for each test, I'll call the run function. And then, so it will continue to run recursively, I'll go for each suite. I'll console log the name of the suite, just so it will be clear which suite is running. And then I'll call suite.run. And that's it. Actually, I think we have it right. So we can call it. And you see all tests are passing. Let's break one of them. And now this one is failing. So just a quick recap of what we've done. The first thing we did was to create a suite entity and then register the describe, which can register new suites. Then we rewire the globals to the root suite and call require. After requiring the files, node go over, the runner go over each test and each suite and adds it to the root suite. After that, we have suites which are unpopulated, and we need to go over the children suites with this function over here. And this function goes over each one of the suites, call the callback after rewiring the globals to it, so it will actually populating the model. And the last thing we did was to run the first root suite, which recursively run all the tests and the suites underneath. Any questions? Okay, great. So you must say, like, this is really ugly. It's all black and white, and test runners not look like this. And you're right. So the one of you that runs Mocha know the notion of reporters. And for example, this is the spec reporters, the spec reporter, and this is the dot reporter, and the neon reporter if you'd like. And actually, anyone can write his own reporter without interfering with Mocha core code, which stays the same. And this is a really powerful principle. For example, if I want to run my test in the CI, I need a different reporter for the CI. And besides all the nice things it makes us and as users do, it also helps the ones that writes the code, because they can separate between the core code and the code that handles printing to the console and stuff like that, which makes the code really clean. Because as you've seen, we wrote a really simple code, and we don't want to pollute it with a lot of console logs and preserve states of the depth and the time that the tests are running. And also it gives other developers a way to continue and develop a small part of the application. So let's go and think how we can solve it. And a nice way would be to use the event emitter of Node to create a small plugin system. And for whom that don't know the event emitter class, it's a simple class that a lot of classes in Node.js extends. And I just want to use simple functionality of the event emitter, and it's the on method and the emit method. As you see, we have an instant of an emitter, and you can listen to events, and you can emit events. And then, let's say our runner will be an emitter. So we can give the runner to a reporter. The reporter could listen to events like we'll start testing, finish testing, test is failing, and do the reporting for us. So it will be separated than the code, the main core logic. So let's start. First thing, we would like to actually make a runner an event emitter. And a way of doing this is to bring the event emitter class, which is a Node.js core. So event emitter. And we need to extend event emitter. I'm using super here because I need to call the constructor of the event emitter. And now I can call this the emit, and this is the runner. I'm calling emit on start, and also one for end. But nothing is connected to it. So let's go back to our outer API, and the outer API, the Node API that we wrote is here. And we can try and think about a way to connect a reporter. So the first thing would be to bring the reporter. We don't have it yet, I know. And the second thing would be a method like add a reporter, or just to add it in the constructor, doesn't matter. But I'll choose to add it to the constructor. And now I need to be able and give the runner to the reporter. So let's create a reporter. And let's say it's a function that's get the runner. And let's just console log to verify that we have all the wiring right. Okay. So we brought the reporter, which is a function that gets the runner. We brought it to the runner. And now we need to wire it from here. So we get a reporter. And now before I'm starting to even run the test, I can call the reporter, and I'm calling the function and giving the function the runner itself. So it's a bit complicated, but as you see, I'm calling the reporter function, I'm giving it the runner, so now I can start listening to events on the reporter, and let's see if we got it right. And yes, you see the first console log came from the reporter itself, and it's also an event emitter. As you see, it has events and events count, and max listener, which are attributes of each event emitter. And let's try to listen to an event. So I'm going back to the reporter, and instead of console log the reporter, I'm saying on start. Let's log start testing. And on end, let's have end testing. So let's call it, and as you can see, it logs my start testing and end testing, which I just needed to wire the events themselves. So now we have all the wiring, almost everything's right, but let's try to think on which events we would like. So we would like to know about a new suite that starts, so we can log it and maybe indent a bit to the right. We would like to know when a test is passing or failing, so we can accumulate it and send the results in the end, also to print it to the user. And this should be enough for our simplified test runner. Okay. But if we go back, and for example, success or a failure of test is here in the test class, and we don't have a reference to the reporter or to the runner. We need a reference to the runner so we can emit events. So I'm going back to the runner, and I'll start to push the runner to every suite. So I'm putting the runner as an attribute, as a prop for the first suite. I'll go to the suite and make it understand that he knows what a runner is. Now I need to supply the runner also to the tests and also to the other suites. And I just left with going to the test, being able to get the runner, and also add it here. So now I have the runner everywhere, and I can start emitting events. So we said that here, instead of logging, we want to let the reporter do the logging. So we can just emit an event of test pass. With the title. And here we can emit an event of test fail with the title and also the error. And we don't need this anymore. In the suite itself, every time we start a new suite, instead of logging it, we can emit. So runner start suite. And after finishing, end suite. So yeah. So I'll go back to the reporter and I'll just add these events. So we have start suite. We have end suite. We have test pass. And test fail. Let's just verify that it works. And it cannot read property emit of undefined in one of the suites. So I'll just try to figure out what's wrong.
Using runner
in the runner.js. Yeah, of course. I don't have those runner here. I just have this, which is me, the runner. Yes, thank you. In the back. So start testing, sweet, test pass. Seems to be wired perfectly. So I'll just try to write. Yeah. So I'll just modify it a bit so it will look better. So let's try to write the reporter. When I start a suite, okay, I need few variables and maybe something to make it nicer. So maybe you know Chuck. Maybe GitHub will help. So Chuck is just a library to do terminal styling. It will help me do something like this. And I also need some variables. For example, I need to preserve the depth, starting with 0. I also need how many tests are passing and how many tests are failing. So I'll just keep it in a simple variable. And now, when I'm logging the suite, when I'm starting a new suite, I actually want to add 1 to the depth counter. And when I'm ending a suite, I want to send 1 down. When a test is passing, I want to add 1 here. And when a test is failing, I will add 1 to the failure tests. So now I also want to log everything in the right indentation. And in order to do that, we have the depth, which is add 1 depth for each start suite. So I'll write a helper function. I'll call it print. And print will console log my message, but indented. So let's have a message. It's a function get a message, and it console logs. Let's have this repeated over depth. And let's add the message. So this helper function gets the message and will print it in the right place according to the depth variable. So now when I'm printing the start suite, I can actually print, yeah. I can actually print the title in the right place. When a test is passing, I can print, and I need to print in green. Yeah. This is awesome. And also, I need the title. Sorry? Template string, yeah, it should fix it for me, I don't know. Okay, I'll do it. Whoa. I'm not sure what's wrong with the linter.
Maybe let's try.
Sorry?
Maybe let's try to run.
Okay. I leave it to the end.
So, panel in the bottom, maybe click on arrows. Less code.
Ah, this one.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, so an unexpected character in 27 here. Wow. I'm not sure. It seems to be fine. I'll just do it again. So I'll add the print function.
Maybe the problem is upper.
Sorry?
Maybe the problem is upper.
Yeah, it seems to be working now. I don't know. Okay. Just works. Whoa. This is really weird. Okay, now it works. Okay, sorry for that. And now in the failing one, let's write it in red. And instead of doing like an X sign or something, I can just show the number of the failing test, followed by this, followed by the title. Yes. And I also want to print the error. So let's have the error also. And I think we've got it right. And now in the end, we want to know how many, if our tests are passing or failing. So I'll just choose if I don't have failing test. So fail different than 0. It means my tests are passed. It's just a naive condition. And else, it means that my tests are fails. So let's log the number of the passing tests, followed by passing, and here I can write it in red, test failed. And I'll add nice emoji. Yes. So here I also want to go with exit code 0, and here with exit code 1, just for the CI. And let's write the number of the failing tests and the passing tests. So starting by the passing one, so passing okay, that's it. Let's try it and see if we got it right. But before I do that, yeah, one of the tests is broken. Let's run it. Yes. So and let's fix one of the tests. Actually, I think I've got the condition the opposite. So if I don't have 0, it means I failed. So if I have 0 failing tests, it means I passed. So all tests are passing. And let's break one of the tests. And as you can see, one of them is failing, and all tests are fail. Let's just finish with passing tests, and that's it. So thank you really for listening. And, hope I succeed by showing you how it works. And it was less than an hour, and we created a really simplified version of the test runner. Any questions?
Thank you for the talk. Just a quick question. How do you think, how hard it can be to extend your example to run tests in parallel, for example, by using Node.js cluster mode?
So actually, this is a good question. I have something in GitHub that you can actually take the code and extend it. I did a really simplified version without taking any binary files, and I didn't implement before hook, before each, after each, only async tests, but it's all really easy to implement. I just don't have time today, but I can send you later. This is the vanilla repo on GitHub, following to the talk. You can read the code, and it's a simple explanation of what you can do to extend it. Run before, after, before each, and actually do it yourself. If I had more time, I would lovely to help and show you how, but it's also nice to play with it. So I'll send it all if in the meetup group later on.
Okay, thanks. I will try.
Yes. Any more questions?
More questions? No questions?
Okay.
So yes, thank you, Ron, for your amazing talk. Let's give it another round of applause.